Hello and welcome to Rugby League Backchat from the LD Nutrition Stadium. Another busy week from the world of Rugby League, and to chew the fat, we have three very special guests. Starting with the editor of League Express, Martyn Sadler, writer and author, Mike Rylance, and the chairman of Swinton Lions, Andy Mazey. Gents, welcome. I want to start by talking about Easter. It's been and gone, and everyone is now feeling the effects of it, as is documented by the extensive injury list that is currently devouring squads up and down the country. 86 injuries currently in Super League. Martyn, is that a point that quite simply tells us that we need to have a look at what we're doing with the Easter programme?
Well, if we don't get that message now, we never will we? You know, I think the thing about Easter is that Good Friday is tremendous, in my view. There are some great games, mainly derby games and big crowds and so on. But then we play again on Easter Monday, and the crowd's never as good as they were on Good Friday. And the players play looking as though they're a bit tired. And then the third game comes up at the following weekend, and the players, to me, look exhausted. And actually, crowds drop quite significantly for that third game. So, you know, if we didn't have two games over Easter, we could spread the Easter games around the Easter period a lot more effectively than we do at the moment. And I think we'd still get great crowds. We could play some games on Easter Sunday if we wanted to do that. And I think it would work really well. And the key thing is we'd have far fewer players suffering the sort of injuries. I mean, we listed all those 86 injuries in League Express this week. Mm-hmm. And I mean, Hull have got 15. Hull FC are at the top of the league with 15. Castleford was second with 11. And this is just in Super League before you even start thinking about the Championship. So, Andy, I don't know whether you would, you know, agree with me that actually the time has come to actually change what we do at Easter.
I think I would. I think, you know, historically, Easter's been a period as a supporter you look forward to, don't you? You know, you've got your long weekend off work, and you get your rugby league in, and it's a double fix over the weekend. But you know, it takes its toll on the bodies of these guys and these athletes. You know, I think times have changed, and they are finely tuned athletes now, aren't they?
Of course.
You know, the big athletes and the collision and the contact and everything that goes with it. It takes a lot out of these guys' bodies.
Mike, you've seen a lot of things come and go from inside Rugby League. Easter is one thing that has been a tradition we've kept hold of. What's your take on this? Do we need to move on?
It is a tradition, and I like to see traditions generally maintained, but it seems to me to be something of an anachronism these days, in that we always used to look forward to it, as Andy said, but I think the time has come now where working habits for supporters have changed over the years. So some people work on Good Friday or on Easter Monday, don't necessarily have the whole of that long weekend off. And we've got to take that into consideration as well. Having said that, we have the players also who we could treat, if you like, as employees. And to put them through the mill twice in a short period of time seems to me to be unrealistic in this day and age.
Martyn, in terms of the product, we talk about trying to sell Rugby League as this great product. The game on Thursday at Wigan, London, was anything but a spectacle, if we're completely honest. Was that surely not a knock-on effect of the fact that we've asked those players to play 4 times in 13 days?
Well, that certainly, as I've said, it does have its effect. There's no doubt about it. Although I thought, actually, that game wasn't quite as bad as some people suggest.
Really?
You know, I thought, I thought London were really quite impressive, if I'm really honest about it. And they were able, they showed how to deal with Wigan, actually, and, you know, they couldn't quite pull off a victory, but I thought they played extremely well. But, you know, in a wider sense, I really do hope that the clubs are going to sit down and sort this out fairly soon, because, you know, one of the problems actually for the players, which I've sort of talked about for quite a while, is that they don't have a really strong players' union to deal with this sort of issue. I'm fairly sure that if the players had something like the Professional Footballers Association or even the Rugby Union Players Association, I think they would be coming, you know, with this issue as one of the foremost in mind to get sorted out.
Let's not forget, I mean, look, it's obviously tough for the Super League players. What about the poor part-time lads, Andy? I mean, they don't have the luxury of recovery in between the games. Some of them will be back working. These are part-time lads that are asked to do exactly the same thing.
Exactly right, and I think that's one of the big issues with the Championship as well. Let's not forget, you do have an element of full-time clubs playing against part-time lads, and I think that can be, I wouldn't say dangerous, but certainly it's not the best because, you know, taking our club as an example, we played on Good Friday, we travelled to Batley on Easter Monday, and then within days we had to get the guys on a flight over to Toronto, and you know that does take its toll on guys' bodies, but. You know, again, they are big, strong. The full-time guys are, you know, they're as we speak now, they're sat in rehab and swimming pools and working on injuries, and unfortunately the part-time lads are on building sites, etc.
And of course, it's a problem that Toulouse have all the time with the travelling that they have. You know, it's a very difficult weekend for them. I know from speaking to them. That if we're going to have foreign teams in the British competition, then we ought to take that into account as well.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah, so I think you definitely drew the short straw, Andy. I mean, somebody giving you that schedule of matches over Easter, I think somebody at the NFL doesn't like you all that much, do they?
Well, here's the question, though. So we all seem to be in agreement that we need to revisit the Easter schedule and do something with it. Martyn, what do we do with it? It's easy for us to say it needs to change. How do we change it for the better?
I think you've just got to have one match over Easter. It's as simple as that, really.
But we're already starting the season in January.
Well, we are, and quite frankly, you know, I don't think we should have 29 matches during the season. I mean, the Super League season is 29 matches that includes a Magic weekend and 6 loop fixtures. Yeah. I think we've got to move away from that. We've got to recognise that sometimes you've got to go for quality over quantity. And I've always thought that playing other teams 3 times is crazy anyway. You know, I just don't think it works. I mean, it's interesting, this year the Championship have got 14 clubs and they're playing each other once plus the Summer Bash. Now that gives 27 fixtures, doesn't it?
Yes.
That's a better arrangement. If Super League had that, then you know you could have that one game over Easter, couldn't you?
So we say 14 teams would be an option to bring.
Well, I think Super League ought to have 14 teams. Personally.
Yeah, I'd second that as well.
Yeah.
I mean, 12 is far too few. It doesn't stimulate the appetite of the audience for it in the first place. You get tired of seeing the same teams play each other time and time again. We've said this endlessly. But nothing.
But would that not then dilute the quality, Andy, if you bring 2 extra teams in?
I think looking at it at the moment, if you took the top 2 from Championship at the moment, they're both full-time operations.
Yeah.
They're both clubs that I feel could compete with the bottom end of Super League at the moment. But that wouldn't always necessarily be the case, would it?
But just to emphasise what Mike says, this weekend we've got Warrington playing Wigan in the Challenge Cup. And Danny Spencer, who's our statsman, put out a tweet a few days ago saying that those 2 clubs have played each other 20 times since 2015, you know, in various competitions and so on. Yeah. Now that, you know, to be able to sell that game as something really special is very difficult when they're playing each other so many times, isn't it? Agreed. It's just too much, really.
You may dilute the quality, though I doubt it, but you certainly increase the interest and
increase the diversity.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
If I was to play devil's advocate a little bit here, though, and I'm sorry to do that, but I have to do that sometimes. if you go to 14, yes, you might not dilute the quality, but we're having another league restructure, aren't we? Do we really want another one again? We were all moaning that we were having another one a couple of months ago.
Well, the thing is that the current TV contract runs out in 2021, and the new one will come in from 2022 as it stands at the moment. And we've got to be planning ahead and deciding how we're going to create a structure that is going to appeal to television, to broadcasters. And in my view, sticking to just 12 clubs in Super League, as Mike has pointed out, is not really very attractive because you've only got 12 clubs. It's interesting, isn't it, that even then, Sky, as the broadcaster, tend to only focus on some of those clubs and not others. There was a letter in our in our newspaper recently from somebody who wrote rather sceptically, but quite understandably, saying Castleford are on virtually every week. And of course, Sky picked Castleford because Castleford tend to be a side that plays attractive rugby. But by doing that, you know, you're in danger of just overfeeding the viewer, aren't you?
But in football, you know, Liverpool and Man City are on every single week at the minute. Is there any difference?
Yeah, but football's a different beast, isn't it? Football's the national game, and people do want to see these big clubs, don't they? And I don't think we can really compare ourselves with football. It'd be great if we could, but I don't think we can do it at this moment.
Just to wrap up this topic then, Mike, look, same 14 teams moving forward. That's not going to happen next year. So if we're going to change it next year, how do we change it? What's the short-term fix before the next broadcasting contract to make Easter more manageable?
Well, I wouldn't be looking at short-term fixes, to tell you the truth. I'd be looking to the medium term, and I think 14 teams is the solution. And for next season, I would certainly drop one of the Easter fixtures.
So, Andy, what would you do next year if it's still going to be 12 in Super League?
Well, first of all, I agree with Mike. I think we've got to stop looking at short-term visions and look at the big picture and medium to long-term and whatever. I'm not a great believer in sort of chopping and changing all the time, and you do reach a certain point where whatever change you do make, then you've got to back it and you've got to stick with it. So I've not got all the answers. I don't really know the solution, but if we do anything, whatever we do, we've got to back that and move forward with it.
Martyn, you normally have an idea.
Well, I actually wrote an article in the current issue of Rugby League World magazine, in which I was advocating, when the new contract comes about, that there ought to be 16 teams in Super League split into 2 8-team conferences, because I think maybe divided East and West, broadly speaking, because I think we've got to get more teams at the top level, because I'm a great believer in this idea that the more teams there are, the wider the footprint of the sport, and therefore the easier it is to generate additional spectators and viewers and so on.
Well, just talk us through the idea of 2 conferences.
What I would like to see is in 2022 2 conferences of 8, which would involve home and away fixtures within each conference. So that would give 14 fixtures, and then 8 fixtures against teams in the other conference to give a total of 22. I would also, I'm going to put this forward in a meeting shortly with some people from Super League, reorganise the Challenge Cup. Because I think when we talk about reorganising Super League, what we have to do in parallel with that is reorganise the Challenge Cup. Because the Challenge Cup is Rugby League's greatest competition in many respects, certainly in terms of being the oldest. And yet it's been neglected in recent years. And we see some terrible crowds, don't we,
Unfortunately,
at Challenge Cup games. And my solution for that is to make the early rounds of the Challenge Cup pool-based, so that they could be, so you could sell season tickets for early Challenge Cup games. Because I think if you don't do that, you're never going to see an improvement in Challenge Cup crowds. So that's a whole argument that we could talk about for quite a long time.
Well, Andy, without putting you on the spot, what's your initial thought to that? It would be a drastic change, wouldn't it?
That's quite a radical change, isn't it? But certainly, I think there's a lot of mileage in what Martyn's saying there. I think at our championship meetings, we've discussed different scenarios and conferences, and maybe regionalising things. Maybe that may be the future. There's guys paid to come up with these concepts, and hopefully, if we do something, there's no guarantees anything's going to change. But if we do, as I say, hopefully it can be well thought out and something that can work for us medium to long term.
I guess it's important that we don't neglect the championship as well. I mean, you look at that competition at the minute, the playoff race looks remarkable, the battle at the bottom looks remarkable too. It's been a great competition to be involved in, hasn't it?
It's fantastic from top to bottom, really. There's there are some great clubs in there as well. Let's not forget. I mean, some of the clubs within that competition they're very big clubs, and arguably without some of the guys in Super League, some of the clubs in Super League, without the funding from Sky, would not be as big as some of the clubs in Championship. So let's certainly not throw the baby out with the bathwater. Let's look at the bigger picture and the sport as a whole.
One of the interesting things in the Championship this year, Andy, is that the 2 promoted clubs, Bradford and York, you often find that promoted clubs struggle, don't you, when they get promoted, but they have actually performed extremely well, and they're both either in or just around the playoff places. And the Championship seems to be splitting into an 8-team top tier and 6-team bottom tier, although that bottom tier does include Widnes, who are sort of, they've cleared their deficit now and are sort of slowly moving up. But I mean, it is, there are 8 clubs at the moment battling for those 5 places, which is a really exciting comp, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good competition, and arguably there's divisions within divisions in that case, with the top 8 being strong and probably four from that 8 at the top, with realistic ambitions of wanting to be in Super League as well.
You see some good quality games as well. I mean, there's no getting away from it. Where teams are encouraged by their coaches quite often to play in a more expansive kind of way. Again, I'm thinking of Toulouse, who are an absolute delight to watch and play a brand of rugby league that is far superior, given the constraints of playing in the Championship as opposed to a Super League, far superior to many that I see in the upper level, to be honest. And it's what fans want to see. They want to see teams throw the ball around, but not stupidly. And Toulouse seem to have found the way to do this, to play adventurous rugby league and without neglecting their defence and ball possession.
It's not really because of
I'm going to have to stop you there because we've run out of time in the first part of this week's Rugby League Back Chat. After the break, we'll be talking about Dave Furner's departure from Leeds, Summer Bash, Magic Weekend and Catalan and Wigan's trip to the Nou Camp. Stay right here. After a short break, we'll be back with more on Rugby League Back Chat. Hello and welcome back to Rugby League Back Chat. Lads, we can only talk about one thing now. Dave Furner has left Leeds Rhinos. They've had a shocking start to the season by their own high standards. Matt, and I interrupted you before the break, so you can start us off here. What are your thoughts on the fact that Furner's gone from the Rhinos?
Well, I am surprised. I didn't think that Leeds would make such what looks like a hasty decision. Obviously, when the decision was announced on Tuesday, they said that Dave Furner had met over the weekend with Gary Hetherington and Kevin Sinfield. The thing about Furner was that it was actually quite an impressive guy, you know, when it comes to dealing with the media. I thought he spoke well. I thought he spoke coherently, logically. You could see what he was trying to achieve, I think. But I think he was really, his goose was cooked by the fact that, you know, those 3 major players that they got from Australia, 2 of whom are marquee players for them this season, probably, when all said and done, haven't really produced the goods as much as the club would have hoped they would do.
Do you think Conrad Hurrell's not
well,
been
Hurrell's been the best of them, but then, of course, he's been injured, hasn't he? He plays a style of game that tends to draw injuries on himself, and so he's missed a few games recently. And you know, the Rhinos have struggled in those games. I think when they went to Salford and got beaten fairly convincingly after having won at Salford earlier in the season, that's obviously the game, the straw that broke the camel's back as far as Leeds Rhinos are concerned. But I'm still surprised because I don't really think that Leeds are in any danger of relegation this year, to be perfectly honest. And I think, you know, I always tend to go back to football and Alex Ferguson taking over at Manchester United. Started off with a terrible record, but they persevered with him and he ended up winning everything. So I don't know. Andy, would you have sacked Dave Furner as a chairman?
Probably not, no. I am a firm believer in giving people every opportunity, whether that just be in day-to-day business or sport. And I'd like to think as a rugby league as a whole, and again, we don't become, you know, the sacking culture doesn't become upon us really, because I think we're better than that. I think, you know, but clearly, you know, we're not behind the scenes at Leeds. We don't know what's going on day to day, and there will be reasons. You know, you don't make decisions without having reasoning behind it.
I mean, to be fair to Leeds, they have grossly underachieved so far, haven't they?
They have, and it's a team that doesn't really work together very well. They haven't gelled together, and the coach must bear some of the responsibility for that. having said that, I do agree with Martyn and Andy that it does seem like a rather hasty decision to sack the coach after such a short period in place. You've not given him really very much time to put his team together.
Where do Leeds go from here as a club, Martyn? They've had coaches come and go. Brian McDermott left less than a year later. David Fern has gone. The recruitment, many people say, hasn't been good enough for a long, long time. What do Leeds do to get back to the height? Because it seems like they're a long way off it at the minute.
Well, Leeds, until fairly recently, were a byword for stability, weren't they? You know, they had a poor time when Super League first began, and they made some appointments that didn't work. One of them was Daryl Powell, incidentally, his first coaching job when he was very inexperienced and didn't quite manage to pull off the sort of results that Leeds expect. They then went through the Dean Lance coaching situation, which was problematic. But then it started working out for them when they got Tony Smith in 2004. And if you remember, that's when they won their first grand final in that year. They had great success with Tony Smith, and it carried on right throughout the Brian McDermott, Brian McLennan in the first instance, and then Brian McDermott. But then I thought, they panicked when they sacked Brian McDermott, in my view. And I don't think that was a wise decision. They brought in Kevin Sinfield, and Leeds had never gone for marquee players before Kevin Sinfield came to the club. Gary Hetherington has always run a very tight ship financially, and he's always taken advantage, quite rightly, I think, of the fact that players want to play for Leeds. So he's always been able. I always remember Gary saying to me that, success in Super League these days comes from success in managing the salary cap. And Gary was always very good at doing that, but he's relinquished that role, it seems to me now, and given it to Kevin. Kevin has gone out and got 2 marquee players from Australia. And you've got to say, that doesn't look to have worked so far, does it?
The flip side of that is, were they lucky with that crop of players that came through, Andy?
I was just going to say that Martyn made reference to Alex Ferguson and the United glory days, if you like. Leeds had a very, very successful period in terms of a crop of players that, arguably like the class of '92 at United, you may never see again. They had some seriously all coming through at once. You do obviously get from time to time quality world-class players coming through, but they had a crop, didn't they, of real strong talent, and that maybe that underpins a team, doesn't it? When you get that level of that calibre of player coming through all at once, you've all come through the system together. They're all mates. They all back each other on the field and off it. Maybe that mentality might not be there at the moment. And
the thing is, if you take in Man United, they always managed to rebuild, didn't they? They haven't done since Ferguson's left, to be fair, but they've always managed to rebuild a new squad. Leeds were now in that position where they had to rebuild a new squad, but for a couple of years, Mike, they haven't been able to do that, have they? How concerning is that for Leeds and for the ambitions that they hold?
I think the problem for Leeds is a widespread one, in that they have a problem with their halfbacks, who are not performing, or haven't done so far, to the standard that we expect of Leeds halfbacks. But there is a dearth of halfbacks throughout the game. The clubs who are successful at the moment tend to be those with experienced players in those key positions. And at Leeds, it's not happening, unfortunately.
Mike, I think you're absolutely right that the Leeds halfbacks haven't really been performing as well as everybody would like them to. And it's interesting to contrast that with what's been happening at Warrington, where they've got 4 players in the spine positions, 1, 6, 7 and 9. They've got Ratchford, Blake Austin, Deck Patton and Daryl Clark. And those 4 players have started in every single Super League game this season so far, which obviously gives stability, obviously generates a tremendous amount of understanding between those 4 players. And for the most part, given Warrington's results this season, you can see how that's worked out. But Leeds, on the other hand, they brought in Tuilola here, for example, and they don't seem to be sure whether he's actually a full-back or a standoff half. They've been moving him around from one to the other. And of course, that tends to disrupt the team, because they've got Jack Walker at full-back, and then they, leave him out to play Lola here there. I don't think it necessarily probably generates great team spirit either. So they need to sort it out. But the problem is that, this year Sinfield came in and brought in 2 marquee players who have not yet fully, as far as I'm concerned, delivered the goods.
Right, Andy. Whose names are we throwing into the hat for the job then?
Well, there's a few recently vacated positions elsewhere from the Championship, isn't there? So, but the route they take now is probably they've tried the overseas route. A relatively high-profile overseas route with marquee signings. Is there an argument to be had that you maybe look within, or somebody who's played at the club and you look at the youth, and get back to those days of maybe bringing some younger players into the side? And it's a difficult decision, isn't it? If we had the answers, we'd be sat over at Henley now, wouldn't we?
Mike, what do you think? Domestic or overseas?
I'd like to see a domestic coach take over at Leeds. I don't see why not. There's plenty of talent around. On the other hand, Australian coaches do appear to be doing the business at major clubs as well. I mean, St Helens to name but one. But then it has to be a very wise decision. The appointment has to be a very wise one in the first place, and far be it from me to say who it's going to be.
Right, Martyn, I'm putting you in charge of Leeds Rhinos.
Of Leeds Rhinos, right.
Who are you, in your ideal case scenario, appointing as the next head coach?
Well, let's go on precedent. When Brian McDermott was appointed, where did he come from?
London.
And who's in charge at London at the moment?
Danny Ward.
Who's got a great history, of course, at Leeds Rhinos as a former player. So maybe that's one way forward. Danny Ward would certainly bring a lot of fun back to Headingley, I think, because he's that sort of guy. The thing that impresses me about him is every time you see him, on the side of the pitch, he always seems to be smiling and enjoying himself. And whenever he talks about his role at London, he's incredibly enthusiastic. And I think one of the problems at Leeds is that it almost seems too serious now. It's not that it doesn't seem as much fun as it should be. Put it that way.
He also has the ability to make his teams grind out wins when necessary. Think of Toronto last season.
As he demonstrated at Leeds this season.
Yes, indeed.
Earlier this season.
Yeah.
What about from the Championship, Andy? You made a good point. There's been some vacancies recently. Richard Marshall is out of a job and was sat with Kevin Sinfield at the Salford game. Would he be someone that would come into Leeds' thinking?
I personally think Richard's earned a shot at a job. Now, whether that be going in as an assistant, firstly in Super League and then progressing, or whether you would, you'd back him and take a punt on Richard. But certainly, for me, he's certainly earned the chance to be given an opportunity, because he's done very well with a limited budget, really, in terms of the bigger clubs in the Championship. He's punched above his weight, hasn't he? And he's my experience of Richard have been really positive. He's a very humble guy. He's well spoken. He does and says all the right things as far as I'm concerned. So I'd love to see a guy like that get a chance and an opportunity. A young British coach. I mean, you look across the Championship. There's others with Leeds connections. Matt Diskin, of course, coaching over at Batley.
Yeah.
The other point that's probably worth making is that Justin Holbrook's contract at St Helens runs out at the end of this year.
What are you trying to imply, Martyn?
And in our newspaper this week, Eamon McManus, the chairman of St Helens, says he's going to sit down to talk about a new contract with Justin Holbrook. But he said, he's aware that, or Eamon told me that he's aware that, other clubs, he was thinking about the NRL, have probably got their eyes on Holbrook as well. But what's to stop Leeds now going in and saying, let's think about talking to you about Leeds?
Well, if we speak about Super League coaches, there are some great British coaches in Super League who are doing a fantastic job. Ian Watson, Salford, who've got one of the lowest budgets in Super League, he's had to rebuild 3 squads because they've sold all the players. They're 2 points off third at the minute.
How about a wild card? Ex-Leeds player Sean Wayne.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Wow. That would be news, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Well,
and then, of course, there's Daryl Powell at Castleford, who I know when Daryl got that job initially, he then stood down from the Leeds coaching position, but it was always said that he would come back again and carry on
Mike,
later.
Would Daryl Powell leave Castleford to go back to Leeds when you consider where the two clubs are, what he's achieved at Castleford, is Leeds a more lucrative role than the Castleford one now?
Well, far be it from me as a Wakefield person to be giving advice to Leeds, because, but if I were Daryl Powell, I would stay put. I mean, he played for Leeds and played very well for Leeds, but as a coach, he didn't make it early on in his career, as Martyn said earlier. But there's no way that I would be going back to old territory if I were Daryl Powell. No, he's got plenty on at Castleford. They're playing reasonably well at the moment. They played very well in the past, and there's no reason why they can't reach those heights again.
And if they were to go overseas, Flanagan, he's out of a job, isn't he? He would be an obvious fit.
Possibly. He might carry too much baggage, I suppose, given what happened at Cronulla. And the fact that the NRL stood him down for not complying with their requirements, not to get involved with the club when he was suspended. So I'm not sure that Leeds would want that sort of thing. But the thing that's really interesting to point out about Leeds is that they've just spent, I think it's something like £45 million on upgrading their stadium, and it looks absolutely tremendous, I've got to say. And I think it's a week on Friday, May the 16th, that they actually are hoping or intending to open the stadium in its entirety with the brand new main stand completely operational. And they play Castleford on that day, oddly enough. And when you've spent so much money on getting the stadium sorted out, they need to start recouping that, don't they? So whoever they recruit, they need to be sure it's going to be the best man for the job. And my suspicion is that whoever they decide that is going to be, they'll probably have the financial capacity to attract him from virtually anywhere, really.
And Andy, just to wrap this up, they've got the small matter of a Challenge Cup game against Bradford as the first game. Richard Agar being in charge, who we've not mentioned yet. Realistically, can Bradford beat Leeds? Is that something that we could realistically think could happen or not?
I don't see why not. I think, obviously, we spoke earlier about there being a number of teams in Championship that view themselves potentially as being Super League clubs, and Bradford have got to be one of those. I watched the game on was it Saturday against Toronto. I thought they coped very well with the big boys in the middle, and for a couple of spells in that game, I thought they were they looked very much in that contest, and I suppose it's how they recover from the travel and what state they're in come the weekend. But I don't see any reason why they can't get up in front of a big crowd and have a real good dig.
There we go. Right, we're going to wrap things up there. Coming up in the final part of Rugby League Back Chat, we'll be speaking about the Catalans' trip to Nou Camp, plus many other matters from the world of Rugby League. We'll be right back after a short break. Welcome back to the final part of this week's Rugby League Back Chat. Don't forget, you can get involved in the conversation too on Twitter at RL Back Chat. There were certainly some comments made last week, gents, that made us go viral. Let's see if you can come up with any in the final part. We're going to talk about the Nou Camp because in a couple of weeks, Catalans and Wigan will go to the iconic stadium and take part in a Super League game, which looks like it will be a record Super League attendance. Mike, I think you're probably in the best position to talk to us about this, given your association with French Rugby League. How big, how pivotal is this in the growth of French Rugby League? I
don't know about pivotal, but certainly it's going to be very big. This game could see not only the biggest Super League attendance, but also the biggest attendance for a so-called home game by a French club ever. The statistics on this matter are pretty vague, as with most French statistics, but the biggest attendance in France for any match at all was in the '54 World Cup of about 38,000 in Toulouse when France played Great Britain. We could see that broken. I'd like to think that that might be the case. Since the Catalans say that they've already sold 20-odd thousand tickets, the Barcelona club is about to put tickets on sale. They hope to sell between 10 and 15,000. It should be touching 40,000 by the time the gates are opened on May 19th. So, it's a historic moment as well. I mean, the media are going to get hold of this. They already have done, but will do throughout France because it's, and Spain as well for that matter, because it is a big event in the biggest stadium in Europe.
To get the Perpignan thing in as well, and there is that association between Catalonia and you can talk to us about this far better than I can, but how important is it that it gets that exposure, that we are getting into such an amphitheatre, one of the iconic amphitheatres in sport?
Yeah, there is a connection, the Cross-Pyrenees connection there. I'm not sure how deep that goes, to be honest, in the sporting sense, because most teams tend to look at their own immediate area, Barcelona and Perpignan as well, for that matter. But Bernard Guasch, the chairman, is Catalan by extraction. His father crossed the Pyrenees in the 30s with the family. So there are personal connections there, apart from anything else. Mm-hmm. As far as the game is concerned, it's just another step along the road to achieving greater recognition for French Rugby League. The Challenge Cup did it to a certain extent last year, and hopefully this will do it again this year.
Mike, how much did the Challenge Cup help French Rugby League last year? Because obviously, the obvious outcome of that win is this game, isn't it? That this is the greatest result of Catalans winning the cup last year.
Yeah.
But I wonder, that there was more coverage. I mean, L'Équipe did, for example, the French national sporting newspaper.
Yeah.
Suddenly gave coverage to rugby league that it hadn't done for years.
Absolutely.
And is that, and of course we've also had stories about sponsors transferring over from rugby union to the Catalan Dragons in Perpignan itself. So that all seems incredibly positive to me.
It is positive. The fact that the sponsor switched over to Catalans is partly due to the fact that USAP, the rugby union club, are doing so badly because they're going to be demoted at the end of this season back into the second division. So rugby league in Perpignan has really got its tail up at the moment. And you're right to say that the Challenge Cup win allowed this game in Barcelona to take place in a certain sense because suddenly everybody knew who the Catalan Dragons were. National newspapers who don't normally touch rugby league at all, or much of any sport for that matter, suddenly took an interest. I had a phone call from Le Monde, for example, who published a long interview about their achievement, and so on and so forth. It raised the profile of the game in France, the Catalan Dragons specifically, much higher than we could have hoped for by any other means.
And do you think, for example, if Toulouse came into Super League, either next season or the season after, that would raise it even more?
Absolutely. There's nothing I would like to see more than Toulouse compete in Super League, where we've said it before, but we'll say it again, 2 French Super League teams playing on home soil would be a massive boost for the game. Plus the fact that hopefully you would have greater impetus even for young French players to come through because they have 2 teams to find their way into in order to increase the standing of the France national team, and heaven knows it needs it.
Andy, what's your take on it all?
I think it's very positive. I read a lot of the social media, and I saw recently that Barcelona put out a tweet, which it's an audience of 30 million people. Well, let's be honest, the game can't turn that kind of publicity and promotion down, can it? No. So I just see absolutely nothing negative at all about this game going over to Barcelona.
Are there any slight concerns, anything to be cautious about, Mike, with this?
The only thing I would say is that we have to bear in mind that French Rugby Union's top division held their championship final there 2 seasons ago and sold it out. Now, that puts rugby league into perspective. We do really need a big crowd to come, maybe halfway towards that. We're not expecting miracles, but we do need to put it into context. So whatever we think about it being absolutely great, you've got to look at it within the wider context, I feel.
Martyn, we do obsess about crowds in rugby league and the sizes and whatnot. We had a quite strong debate about it last week on the Toronto front. In your eyes, how many people need to be in the Nou Camp on that day to make it a success? Or is it already a success that we're going there?
Well, I think it is already a success that we're going there. What's successful about it is that they were invited to go there by the president of the Barcelona club, which was quite remarkable, really. And I think, Mike's already said it. If they get more than 25,000 people there, it will be the biggest Super League crowd since Super League came into being, other than for a grand final. And obviously that's the target that I think they're going to beat quite comfortably. The next target, as Mike said, is the biggest crowd ever to see a game in France. And I think they could get up to 40,000 with a bit of luck. The key thing is we just want the stadium to look reasonably full, don't we? I'm sure that they'll have the bottom tiers open, probably the top tiers probably not. And that should make it look pretty good on television to the casual viewer. And, the message has got to be that rugby league is really going somewhere. It would be great, wouldn't it, if afterwards the Barcelona club actually put something out saying this was such a great game that we're thinking about getting into rugby league ourselves, which they could quite easily do, because they are a multi-sports club, aren't they?
That's right, yeah. If we achieved some kind of landmark figure, i.e. biggest club game in France or Spain, whichever you like to call it, but if we achieve some landmark figure, we can disregard the Rugby Union Championship final to some extent, and show that the game is making progress there from the Challenge Cup to now, then that would be a big achievement and a big boost as well.
Right, Andy, just to move this on slightly, you didn't go to Toronto for the Swinton game. We've all seen what Derek said about the attendance, and was it as high as it was? What were the people of Swinton saying who were there? Did they think that crowd was as big as it was made out to be?
Absolutely. My operations director was reporting back from over in Toronto, and he said it was a very, very large crowd. It's an unusual scenario whereby they sort of drift in and out the game as it's in process, but by all accounts, staff, players, everybody, other fans, they felt that it was a large crowd, and nobody seemed to raise an eyebrow at the 9,500 reported.
Now they will be involved in Summer Bash along with yourself in a couple of weeks' time. It's obviously the same weekend as the Barcelona trip, which may take a few off the gate. There has been a bit of talk for some time now. Summer Bash, is it worth it? Is it not? What's your take on it?
I like it. It's been, I think anything with the lack of TV coverage of Championship, anything that gives the competition profile, in my eyes, is very good. I think the sport moving forward has to have more events. Generally, I think, whether the Magic Weekends are great, Summer Bash is great, and whether more events can be introduced as we move forward, more the merrier for me, really. I think anything that gets TV viewing, it's all about the eyeballs, and as we move towards 2021, it's about getting people, engaged and watching the sport, isn't it? And these things can only help, in my view.
I think it's great. We don't get the chance to see Championship Rugby League on Sky other than Toronto this season, of course. But it's great to see, clubs like Batley and Dewsbury playing each other, and the Summer Bash games are always incredibly competitive games and really enjoyable to watch. And I think most sides play a really good brand of rugby. So I think it's a really good event. I wish more people would go there, because certainly the second day last year was a fairly disappointing crowd, if we're really honest about it. But I just want to come back, though, if I may, to Mike and Mike's love of French Rugby League. I'm quite curious to know, Mike, how you got so interested in rugby league in France. You've written 2 books, haven't you? The Forbidden Game, which was an incredibly well-researched book, and you followed it up with The Struggle and the Daring, which is another brilliantly researched book. I think you've done a fantastic job in both cases. And I'm just curious to know what motivated you to actually do that, because the results are so impressive.
As far as the current book is concerned, after I'd written the first one, detailing the history of the game from its inception in 1934 to the banning by the Vichy government in 1940, people said, yes, but the game came back in the 50s. You know, France played in the World Cup final in 54. They beat the Aussies in their own backyard on the 51 tour and again in 1955. What went wrong after that? And I thought I ought really to find some questions to that, to the answers rather to those questions, and dig up a whole lot more questions along the way as it happened. But really, those 51 tourists who beat the Australians so convincingly with a style of play that hadn't been seen before deserve something better than they had previously had. In that very few people in this country at least knew about that exploit, or if they did, it was very sketchy. And to honour those people, that great team of the 1950s, 4 or 5 of whom featured in a world team, you know, was something that I had to do. But also to explain why France is no longer a member of the big 4 nations as it used to be, and why it's slowly slipped down the scale. And there are many reasons for that, which I detailed in the book.
How do we get France to be one of the big 4? Well, I guess it's big 5 now, isn't it, with the way that Tonga have emerged?
Yeah.
How do we go about it?
Well, it's first of all, you need the Catalans to be working hand in glove with the federation to promote young players. So you're not going to get anything happening in the short term. It's got to be a long-term project, and that's what the federation has to look into. Detection of players, bringing them through, nurturing them, making sure that they've got good coaches in place to coach young players, and also pathways through the Catalans and through Toulouse into the professional environment, because the player pool at the moment is not as big as it ought to be. From
France to Swinton, Andy, I know you've got your own ambitious plans to grow Swinton. Just outline some of them. What's your vision for the club?
Well, the first 18 months since getting involved was all about stability, bringing some some continuity to the club, and putting that platform in place really to build on. And I think we've done that now. Obviously, the changes within the game make things a little bit more difficult than we saw from the outset. But you've got to roll with it, and we are doing. We've got a vision really to it's all sustainability has been our buzzword since I came in, and whatever we do moving forward is all about having a sustainable model, but an ambitious model as well. I think the changes within the sport, we speak about the Torontos, obviously the new bids coming in over at Ottawa and New York, maybe change our sort of planning a little bit. We are geographically a Manchester club. I think the big cities are the way forward. The York have come to the fore, Bradford's, Leeds. Yeah. The Manchester fits in with it. So
would that involve you changing your club name to Manchester, for example?
We haven't gone that far. We've got to look at different scenarios. We've obviously historically we are Swinton. We'll always be Swinton.
But is the vision still to get back to Swinton?
Yeah, that's we've plans in place to develop a piece of land in partnership with Moorside Rangers, the local community football team. But we have to obviously look at the other options, and you wouldn't be doing your job as a director for the business if you didn't look at all aspects and potential new routes. And I think Manchester's something that we've got to look at seriously, because it aligns itself with what's going on in the sport, doesn't it?
You have put it on the badge, haven't you, Manchester now?
We have, yeah. I think when you talk about we're not going to throw away the history or heritage of our club. We've put it onto the badge. It's a branding exercise. Branding's big in sport, and it's not as if we're sat outside of Manchester trying to tap into something. We are a Manchester club, so geographically we've got to take advantage.
And I think it's interesting that when you went to Toronto recently, I think the Toronto club, if I'm right in saying, actually promoted the fact that you're from Manchester.
Yes.
And of course, Manchester chimes, has a much bigger ring to it in Toronto than Swinton would do with respect. And, maybe that's one reason why they got such a big crowd there, actually, when you were there.
You'd like to think so. I mean, we got a lot of plaudits last year from David Argyle in respect of our supporters. I think
they drank well, apparently.
Well, that you can rest assured our fans can drink. That's one thing they are good at. But no, I think Manchester, you switch your television on and you're looking at sport, not necessarily a sport that you normally watch, and you see Manchester, Toronto, you see Manchester, Toulouse, Catalan, the big names, big cities, bright lights. I think that's what it's all about, isn't it?
Great, yeah.
We've got to find a way of keeping our identity, history and heritage, but moving, taking advantage of our geographical location.
Well, hopefully that proves to be a very big success for you, Andy. I'm afraid we don't have time to chew the fat anymore because we have run out of time on this week's Rugby League Back Chat. A big thanks to my guests this evening, Martyn Sadler, Andy Mazey and Mike Rylance. We'll be back in 2 weeks' time, so enjoy your week off and be back for another edition of Rugby League Back Chat. Bye for now.